October in Calgary? Well, it could be. But I suppose it could also be April or May. Anyway, into the jet ski. So I've decided it is time to put the jet ski away. It's getting a little too cold to ride it. That last ride out was borderline hypothermia. And so now it's time to do some upgrades and some basic maintenance. So I've actually had a little bit of time to look at it. I didn't take a whole lot of video, but I did take some photos. It's in really good shape other than some corroded connections, chafing water lines, poorly mounted exhaust fittings, some water lines that don't really make any sense, and is that fiberglass damage? Broken throttle levers, weirdly placed and executed air intakes in the hood, battery tray that doesn't want to stay in the chassis, an air filter that's rubbing up against the body and has become damaged, throttle cable that doesn't run at the right angle because of the wrong throttle plate and doesn't open all the way. Here we have some spark plugs that tell a bit of an interesting story. I won't spoil it for you guys, but you can see that the one on the left is running kind of an okay color, probably a little bit on the cool side, and the one on the right is running a little bit rich. I tested the compression and it had fairly decent compression, I believe 150 and 150, although it's supposed to have a planed head. I had mentioned that the exhaust wasn't mounted adequately. It also had a coupler that wasn't mounted properly and was blowing exhaust inside of the cabin. We got a cracked gas filler from being over tightened, some poorly executed wiring, although it's not nearly as bad as I would have expected. We see some heat shrink there in the background that's questionable. And now a short video clip from when I did this. Oh no, my engine fell out. So, it's getting pretty cold and I decided that it was time to end the season and start tearing my engine apart. And so that's what I did. It looks in pretty good shape. There's been a bit of a hack mechanic working on it. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Stuff happens to people. There's no porting done to the exhaust. There's no porting done on the intake manifold. It looks like it might have aftermarket reeds or reed pedals. There's no porting done to the exhaust. However, it looks like somebody did a little bit of porting inside of the reed cages. There appears to be a couple of score marks in this crankshaft. There it is right there. It might just be that they touched up the cases. It might have blown up at some point and put some marks there. We'll have it apart soon and see. There is a little bit of rust inside of the cylinders, basically just surface rust, but I'm glad that I took it apart. That might have eventually caused a problem, but I'll hone it out. And anyway, yeah, so far so good. Let's see if any of you jet ski brothers can tell me what's wrong with this picture. I'll give you a little bit of a clue. Something is missing and it's causing a part to fit incorrectly. Anybody who knows 650 engines, like the Jet Ski Brothers, will be able to take a quick look at this head and tell you that it has a substantial amount of material removed from the head. I was told that the head was planed, and it appears that it has been. The scary part about this is that I don't think that they then relieved the head to give it proper squish. Yeah, there are some machining marks on the right side here, but kind of none over here, so I'm not sure what's going on. I'm going to have to check the volume on these heads and check squish. So here we have the crank bearing, some pins, the pistons, and a thought I'd take a second and show you guys. They're not in terrible shape. Little bit of scuffing, but I've seen a whole lot worse. This is probably the worst one of the two. It's got a little bit of scuffing there. It just looks like either from ingesting water or from a cold start. And the other one, considerably better shape. These still could be used, but I'm not going to do that because for what it costs to replace pistons, these are 20-year-old, 30-year-old pistons, so I'm not going to put them back in. The rings were also okay as well, but we're not going to use them. I got the end bearings removed. They were both quite noisy. I doubt that the GoPro can pick it up, but there's definitely some weird patterns in the bearing race. They sounded a bit rough. These are very inexpensive to replace, so I'm gonna replace them instead of worrying about it. Even if I was trying to be cheap, I wouldn't reuse these pins. I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but there are some marks. I'll try to take a picture of this with my phone so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So now that I have the crank out, you can see the mark here that I mentioned earlier I thought might be a milling mark. We've got a weld here. We've got a weld here. That means that this crank was rebuilt. My guess is that somebody wanted to line this crank up, and I did check it. It is very much aligned, but I think somebody used a steel hammer. Hi, buddy. The crank is very true. I think what happened here is somebody used a steel hammer before deciding to use a brass one or some other method. When they were truing the crank, they smacked it there, and I think the marks that I can see are actually the imprint from the head of the hammer. There are some questionable things on this engine that make me think that maybe somebody worked on it that didn't know what they were doing a whole lot. I'm hoping that whoever did this, I'm not sure if you guys can see, but there's grind marks here and here, and a little bit here and here. I'm really hoping that somebody who knew what they were doing was doing some fine balancing on this and decided to remove a bit of material for that reason. Yeah, cross my fingers. So I was right about the porting. Somebody did do a little bit of porting on the cases. This is what you call tunnel porting. Somebody has gone in and carved out a little bit to the transfer port areas. I spent a little bit of time just with some hand tools and a couple of files and actually a tool that I made, and kind of cleaned up the ports a little bit. And then I got to this, which was a measurement of the exhaust port window from the lower side. On one side compared to the other, there's about 1 millimeter's difference, which means 1 millimeter difference in exhaust port timing. For a lot of people, they might not think that's significant, but 1 millimeter in port timing is actually quite a drastic change. So I wanted to figure out what was going on here, and I came up with what is probably the best way to do port mapping. You simply coat the inside of your cylinder sleeve with a light oil, and then take a thin piece of paper and lay it over it. You want to make sure that you cut it to size basically before inserting it. And then once it's in there, you want to make sure that there are no air pockets or bubbles. Make sure you can take a little brush or something and put some extra oil on. And then you do this. I got this footage with my cell phone, so it's kind of crap, but here. As you can see, the paper burns up pretty easily. Any of the paper that is in contact or thermally coupled to the cylinder wall or the cylinder sleeve with oil won't burn for two reasons. One, it doesn't get a lot of air because it's up against the cylinder wall. And the main thing is that it's actually, as I said, thermally coupled, so the oil locks it to the cylinder wall, and the heat from the flame just gets absorbed by the cylinder, and so it can't actually damage the paper. Anything that isn't coupled to the cylinder wall, as you can see, gets burned up. I did make a little bit of a mistake, and I had an air bubble between the two transfer ports, you can see, and it kind of burnt there. What I did was I burnt off along the top where the cylinder head would be mounted, and it gives me a perfectly straight reference line that I can now use to measure down from basically the top of the cylinder, or the deck as they call it, down to the ports, and get a very accurate measurement of my port timing. And it was off by almost 2 millimeters from cylinder to cylinder, so I had to do some porting. I cleaned up the cases a little bit more and started doing some porting with some basic hand tools. I spent about a week alone just on this half of the case. In these images you can see that the cylinder walls are almost what you would call knurled. Most people probably wouldn't fuss with this, but I've got time. On this one here you can see the back side of that cast sleeve is quite smooth now. It's really difficult to get an image of how poor the porting and the casting is on these cylinders. Very basic porting or port cleanup, I suspect, would give you a great benefit on these engines. Where the sleeve meets the ports is grossly misaligned. There is casting junk just everywhere. It is a real mess. It is quite frustrating for somebody who's a little bit OCD. Here in this boost transfer port, I've already done some work on it, and you can see where it meets, where the cast iron meets the aluminum. I've still got a lot of work to do. And this is after making a tool out of a file and going at it with a whole bunch of tools. I didn't have any intentions initially to change the geometry of the ports, but basically you can see at the right and left in this image, I ended up removing a fair bit of material from the cast iron sleeve. And even on both sides, I was going to say on the left, but on both sides you can see where the aluminum meets the cast. It's still not perfect. Well, that's going to be it for this video. I don't particularly like doing voiceover stuff, but I have a whole bunch of photos, so there might be one or two more of these videos before I get back to my normal routine. Do I have a normal routine? Anyway, if you can guess what part is missing from the engine on the picture that I showed earlier, leave it below in the comments, and I will try to remember to let you guys know what it was in the next jet ski video that I do. It's my birthday in a couple of days, and so I'm planning on going to Beeline on the 12th and then on the 16th, which is my birthday. So there should be some video footage from that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.